Thank you, everybody, for joining the Bassfug podcast. We have a very special guest today, Benn Jordan, aka the Flashbulb, aka
Hi.
Benn and Gear YouTube channel. That's a new
Yeah,
one. How are you, Ben?
I'm good. I'm, hanging in there, quarantined. How are you?
I'm very quarantined right now. Yeah,
Yeah, where are you, by the way?
I'm in Montreal, Canada.
Oh, okay.
We
So what's going on up there? Is it like
uh
quarantined in Canada as well as it is in most of the US?
Yeah, but it's weird because everybody here still goes outside, so it's a different type of person that lives in in the plateau in Montreal.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of resistance to the staying indoors thing, which is weird. I don't know why, but
Here we have like Walmart's open and Lowe's and Home Depot is open, but the other day I was fishing by myself and a cop was like, "Get out of here. Don't you know about the quarantine?" And I'm like, "What?" Like I'm fishing by myself, man. But yeah.
those black
So,
bass will give you the flu.
yeah, I guess so. Something like that. So,
Yeah.
well, yeah.
Yeah, we played a show together here in Montreal, actually. Yeah,
Okay.
we played at. I don't know if you remember. I smashed a guitar, and I used a Dance Dance Revolution mat. I don't know if you remember that.
I
I think you were
barely
dating a girl
remember it.
named Sonia. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. I think I went there in like 2008. And I think Bartel came with me as well. The recording artist, Bartel, he came. It was like his first date with a girl that
Okay.
he brought to Montreal from Toronto. And then he ended up, now they're married and they
Oh
had a kid
wow.
and they live together in Vancouver. So,
Awesome.
yeah.
So back to the whole quarantine Corona stuff. I usually start with the history of the artist, but I kind of want to go into the theme of your new album, if you don't mind, and sort of
Sure.
how it plays into the reality, the hyper real that we have right now with this quarantine. Your new
Yeah.
album, Our Simulacra. I presume that's from the Jean Baudrillard book. Is that correct?
A bit, yeah. I think I've over the last couple of years, a like for something that's further along is I wanted to do either a book or a podcast or an audio book or a YouTube channel or something like that on existentialism, and not so much existentialism in the classical way of um I guess the more philosophical things, but I guess more in
Descartes.
like what is reality on a scientific level, like what is reality, because that's such a huge question and there's so many different things to digest. And the simulacrum and simulacra was a huge one, and simulation theory was another one that like really kind of caught me up for a while. For like months I just sort of dove deep into this theory where it's like, wow, these things actually make sense. And I've talked to some physicists and I've talked to some people in it, and it's all valid stuff. They're all like, yeah, it's likely that we're living in a simulation of some sort, and things like that are pretty crazy. But I think more than anything, the simulacra that you're referring to and that I'm kind of referring to is that we don't really know what's real anymore, especially with the way that our media works and the way that just social media has played into things. We definitely live in our own echo chambers of what is real. And you first notice it when you see somebody that you don't agree with, like, okay, a Trump supporter, they believe these things and these things aren't real. But then you kind of realize, oh, I don't either. Nobody does. Like, we're all in different realities, and it's pretty bizarre. And yeah, this COVID-19 thing really is a good example of that, with the misinformation that everybody has.
Or lack of information.
Yeah, lack of information. But a great one is the one that we sort of in America here, we had this big campaign that said, "Don't wear masks." Like
Yeah.
every single media outlet was like, "Masks don't work. Don't wear masks." And I think this was like the CDC in America was basically sort of saying this in hopes that people wouldn't buy up all the masks and things like that. And so what ended up happening is uh I would look at my social media feed and people would literally be taking pictures of people wearing masks in a shopping center or something like that and being like, look at this idiot. And it was like, well, masks do work. Like, you realize that like every doctor and nurse wears masks. Like, they surely do work. And now officially, our government has told us to wear masks because they work, and everybody's like, wait a minute, no, they don't, and you sort of end up with this. It's like a great example of that is sort of nobody knows what's going on. Everybody has a different reality. Masks work in one person's reality, and another one person, it doesn't. And so it gets really confusing, and it's a lot of white noise, I guess.
And the enforcement and pressure of those beliefs, like the people that say, oh no, the masks don't work, and they really really don't want you to wear a mask, right? It's not just like, he wears a mask, whatever, I don't think it works. It's like, no, you can't wear that mask.
Yeah, it gets caught up in that tribal psychology that's sort of like, I play PS4, how dare you talk about Xbox? Oh, I like Mac, how dare you own a PC? That sort of thing. It almost gets caught up in that weird grouped up human thing that we do. And it's interesting because the way from the beginning of this, my take on the masks is I wear them when I go out, not when I go out to like the woods or something, but if I have to go to the grocery store or something, I'll wear a mask. And the only reason I do it is because it reminds me not to touch my face, and it reminds everybody else that there's a huge fucking pandemic happening right now. Like that's the only reason I do it, is it's like other people see me, they get freaked out, and they don't touch their face.
That's exactly what I've been telling people. That's exactly what it's like. Let's say the N95 doesn't even work, at least it's scaring the shit out of everyone,
Exactly. Yeah. I think that like if everybody's wearing masks, everybody is not allowed to forget, is not allowed to, stare at the Cheez-Its and forget that, they shouldn't be touching the box and then touching their face afterwards. It's like a good reminder of what's happening.
Yeah. So going back to the theme of your new album and the simulation theory, I just want to play devil's advocate. One thing I hear about simulation theory is that people say they think it's a long way around intelligent design. Is that something, do you think that's a true statement, or?
Yeah, no, I don't think so much. I think that like you'll always have, almost sort of going with what we were just talking about, where you have people in their little tribes, and they sort of they'll I guess pattern that quilt the way that they want it to be. And it's also important to look at things like simulation theory and realize that like, oh, religion is not that far off from this. Like religion is essentially another take on existentialism. Like, oh, I exist because God has created me and he told me not to eat pork and, other things or whatever it is. And so I think that simulation theory is a little bit more rooted in science than religion is. And it's a little bit more modern, but it could still be taken as, I guess, if you were to be totally fair, you could still consider it to be a modern religion. But yeah, so I think where these two things come in common a bit is rare earth theory, because intelligent design likes to point to rare earth theory, and simulation theory also can point to that basically because of the Fermi Paradox. Is, why have we not had any proof of intelligent life in the universe? And we could see so far in the universe, well, it's because intelligent life is so incredibly hard to come across. And so that's a very easy place for a Christian to come in and say, well, yeah, because God created us,
I never heard of rare earth. What's rare earth?
So rare earth theory, it's a good theory. It's it basically, if you look at all of the things that had to happen for us to be an intelligent species, it is absolutely incredible. We have overcome so many extinction events. We've overcome, like, just the fact, a great example, just one of many, would be the location of Jupiter. Like, Jupiter blocks us from so much crap from space that would be, constantly bombarding the Earth and creating extinction events over and over and over again. Tardigrades, for example, our Earth, many times has been hit by things. It's been, a bunch of lava. And we had tardigrades would be sent out into the atmosphere, the outer atmosphere of the Earth, or up into space. And they're just this. Have you ever heard of a tardigrade? It's like a water bear. It's a tiny little.
Never
heard
species. Of a tardigrade. Never.
Yeah, so they're all over the place. You could find them in moss. You could see them even with small microscope or magnifying glass. But they've existed outside our atmosphere and then floated back down. And, they were able to they're able to reproduce and they're able to do everything in our outer atmosphere because they're such a rigid species. And then they floated back down, and they're almost like a save file for evolution. Like life was able to continue from them once again, and give it another 100,000 years, and then things were moving along again. And so, so if you look at all of the hardships that and all of the improbabilities that it took for us to become an intelligent life, that is rare earth theory, essentially, is that it's so incredibly hard for intelligent life to exist. That would be the explanation or the theory for the Fermi Paradox, is that we may actually be the only intelligent life due to the I guess rarity of our intelligence. So
yeah, and even just to go further, even your own life, thinking like, my dad had to seduce my mom, and his dad had to seduce her mom, and so on and so forth, and this is like pre-Tinder, we're talking like people in cabins in the woods and stuff, right? Like, so I don't know how that even existed.
How is that even possible? Yeah,
like we could barely survive quarantine. They didn't even have toilet paper to hoard back then, right?
It was rough. Well, I'm trying to think. I'm not entirely sure that I believe in rare earth theory, but one thing that I do believe in is with the Fermi Paradox. I think that, like, if I were to guess the number one reason for the Fermi Paradox, it would be that there is something in science that happens that, like, every intelligent species gets up to. It just blips them out, and whether it blips out the entire universe, whether it be like I don't want to get into like Higgs boson vacuums or something like that, but basically, when we're colliding particles and when we're doing things like that, we're kind of poking reality every time. We're just sort of like poking it with a stick, like, hey, let's look at this. And I think when we're doing things like that, I think there might be one thing, that one level we hit as we're leveling up as a species, where we just blip everything out, whether it be, again, the universe, or whether it just be all human life, or whatever it is. And I think that might be the explanation for the Fermi Paradox, and that's terrifying. That makes the idea that we might be living in a simulation actually comforting, because we're actually alone. There's a purpose. So
do you think that now, I don't know, you seem very you seem like an expert on the subject. So if I sound like a noob here, excuse me, listeners or whatever. But do you think maybe it has to do with just even the time length of our existence as humans? Like, what, we've been around for a few thousand years, like 100,000 years or something like that. So in terms of like space travel, doesn't it take like a long ass time to go to one universe or one galaxy to another?
Yeah, it's exponential. So, when you think about like where we were in 1850, and then where we were in 1900, and then where we were in 1950, and where we were in 2000, like it's pretty insane. It's definitely, you could see the curve go way up in technology. And I think that it's going to continue to do that as we, get more and more AI and stuff. Like, most experts believe that, like, the singularity event of artificial intelligence is, most will say it's within 100 years. A lot will say it's within 50. Some will even say it's within 20. So, I mean, that's just a great example of, like, once that happens, then as a species, going to space is pretty easy. Things like that. So, but yeah, so the way that we look at other species, we classify them as a species that either, like, we've almost taken advantage of our entire planet. They classify them as another species would, like, another intelligent species would take advantage of their entire solar system. So they would take advantage, they would like have like a Dyson sphere around the sun and be able to harness all the energy of their sun. And then there's ones above that take advantage of their whole galaxy. And those things, we would either see them existing, or, it's expected that we would see them existing in the distance somewhere, or we would see the relics of them existing, because maybe they don't exist anymore, because we're talking about billions and billions of years, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's what's puzzling about the Fermi Paradox is, we just don't see people. We don't see, or not people, but we just don't see intelligent life.
Do you think we'll terraform other planets in the next 100 years, or?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
If we exist, if we last that long without an existential crisis.
Yeah.
And I don't think coronavirus is an existential crisis. I don't think global warming is. I think things like physics experiments are closer to existential crisis, like things that will actually remove every single human being from existence.
Yeah. Huh. So your new album.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's easy to get heavy. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so I guess it's clear that you're fascinated by the simulation theory. And it's funny how you're almost creating reality by creating culture, by making music, and you're very influential. You've been around for what, 25 years, I think.
Yeah,
close to
like
it.
that, yeah.
And how many people have you inspired to go make their own bands or even throw shows or whatever and build culture, right? And I think if you look compared to, like, say, even like 50 years ago to now, you have science is more of a mainstream kind of cool thing now. Like, I remember 20 years ago, if you're a programmer, people thought you were a nerd, but Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg totally changed that, right? So we have a
I
more
remember
healthy environment.
in high school, like telling people that, like, one year I just didn't go to school. Like, I just, like, a truancy officer had to bring me in to my junior year in high school. And I remember people just being like, what have you been doing? You used to, like, sell us acid and stuff, and now you're just gone. I've been like, oh, I've been on the internet. And I remember just getting these, like, eye rolls from, like, all the girls, just being like, oh my God, what a geek.
Yeah.
But little did they know.
So it's great that you're taking your ideas, you're finding interests, you're cultivating these interests, and, like, going back to school and showing people that you're a programmer, you're presenting to the world these ideas in sort of the form of your art. Is that, like, a good way to explain it, or?
Yeah, I mean, that's a way that, like, the way you just explained it makes me prouder to do what I do than how I normally would explain it. I normally would just say that I do whatever I want, and then sometimes share it with the world. Like, I look at my job as a very selfish one, but I do hear from fans who, say that it's impacted their life in a big way, and that really does inspire me to keep, I guess, giving it to the public, or to keep selling it, or whatever it is, to keep sharing it.
There's a line in I think this is like the music video. I heard the album and then I saw this song was the music video, which is a cool video, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. I'd like to ask you about that. I don't know how much you want to talk about, but
Sure.
there's a line. It says, all of your faith, or is all your faith a simulation? And it's kind of cool. Like, I guess we already sort of talked about that, but it's cool that you kind of put all that in there,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's. I think that's sort of the point, I suppose, is like it says, like, all of your hate is in a simulation. All of your joy, like, all of the things that you like, they may not be the things that you think that they are. And so it's kind of interesting, because the first video ideas I had was actually using a lot of political, I guess, signals or things like that, like sort of like a Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump, Joe Biden type thing. But I figured that by the time I got done with the video, the landscape would have changed already, because that's how quickly like, all the camps are changing, and everything else. And luckily I didn't do that, because we had a global pandemic by the time the video actually came out.
Global pandemic to the rescue.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But honestly, it is interesting, because it was awkward to, like, release the album and the video as all this was happening. And it's interesting to sort of be, at least for some people, some of my listeners, for this to be like their quarantine soundtrack.
Yeah.
Like, the soundtrack of this part of their life that may go down as like the most significant global events in their life. And like it's kind of interesting to be like, oh, this Simulacra album is part of that, which may there may be one person that may look at it differently as a result of that, and then I guess that kind of makes me proud to have all that line up.
I want to talk about your history, but I'm almost worried I'm going to forget about your YouTube channel. When did you start deciding that YouTube was sort of the way to go, like bridging from like just being an artist? I guess you were kind of a weird artist. So you were an artist, but you were also working in like popular media, right? You were doing like advertisements. The famous Dove commercial, which
Yeah.
I think is that spawned the body positivity movement, in my opinion. I don't know if you think that, but
I think it could have, yeah. So like Dove had been really, when I say Dove, I mean Ogilvy, the ad company that made that. Ogilvy had been very good at sort of merging body positivity with the brand Dove. And at no point, I really hate to say this because it bursts so many people's, I guess, confidence in the branding of Dove and stuff like that. But like, at no point did I think that this was anything more, that this ad was anything more than just a really clever way to sell shampoo and soap and
okay,
beauty products to overweight people,
okay,
like, or people who didn't see themselves as pretty. Like I wanted people to sort of, or I guess I didn't want to fool myself to think that this was actually a positive campaign that had anything to do with uh, something other than making money
money,
from
yeah.
selling beauty products.
I'm sure Procter and Gamble aren't reading Bell Hooks or anything like that.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But at the same time, I think that it did have that effect. It was just sort of un like I don't think anybody at Dove gives a fuck. I just, and I wonder, like, will I be sued for saying that? I don't really care, but um
I think you're safe. They are
this,
listening.
yeah, I doubt they're listening, but um yeah, but I do think that that actually did help along the movement of body positivity, which I don't know. I, it's an interesting movement. I've some of it I agree with, some other stuff I don't agree with. Like I've seen some body positivity stuff that's like encouraging people to be less healthy than they could be, and I guess I'm just sort of like, well, I want people to live a long time and not suffer too. So
Yeah.
somewhere in between those two. So
Yeah. Wear the face mask or don't. I don't care. Yeah.
right, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So your new YouTube channel is pretty cool. So now you're a YouTuber. How is that? Do you like that better than composing, or is it sort of the same thing?
It's very different. I started my YouTube channel after making the Piety of Ashes album, where when I made that album, I probably was the most antisocial and sort of just living in solitude. I was just like living in the woods, working on music all day. And I would do something like go get my hair cut, and I wouldn't be able to finish a sentence. Like the person cutting my hair would like ask me a question, and I realized that I was actually coming into a sort of speech problem, believe it or
Wow.
not. And so uh, I opened a YouTube channel. That was my way of dealing with that. Was like, okay, I'm going to force myself to say really long sentences into a camera that the whole world is going to see, or not the whole world, but a bunch of viewers are going to see. And after doing that a few times, I started getting some gear sent to me, and I started making really actual meaningful relationships with the companies that make the gear that I create music with. And the whole thing just sort of, I guess, snowballed from there. And now this is the first year where I actually look at it as a like serious future thing. Like now it's a life move. Like I'm not going to quit making music, and I don't like it more than making music, but it actually fits now. It's rather than just a temporary thing that I'm trying out. Now I'm just like, okay, this is going to work. I'm actually going to put time and effort into it. So yeah.
And you're helping your fans and new producers too. You're showing people how, like the micro freak, and this is how it's done. And
Mm-hmm.
it's cool to have someone at your level, be able to do tutorials and show people how to do things, right? You're pushing the passing the torch, as they say, right?
Yeah, it's hard to like look at 25 years of noodling around with gear and sort of like coming up with my own workflows and things like that. And it was really hard to ever look at that as anything other than, some meaningless, all it's done is made my albums and it's going to go into the grave with me. And this is actually a great way to pass that on, to be like, oh, you could do this with this piece of gear if you like. And, I think that that's where it's probably the most helpful. And that's probably where it fits into the audio YouTube scene or climate, because I don't like looking at other channels as competition. I like trying to fill in the gaps that they don't cover.
Yeah. And plus you're getting free gear. You're living the dream, dude. My God.
Yeah. Yeah. More than that, I actually get to like get some gear that's in alpha or beta mode and,
Oh, wow.
or that's not finished yet, and contribute to it and to my liking. And that's just like so incredible to be able to, work with a company like Polyend and feel like, oh, you know what, this should happen when you press this button, or maybe we could add in this effect and we could do this, and then that actually, be made into a piece of gear that I will then use. Like, that is so cool.
That's awesome. Okay, I'm gonna go. This is the question I usually ask at the beginning of the podcast, but we had some more important things to talk about. How did you get started in music? Did you like have it around when you were a kid? Like, were your parents into music? How did you discover it? Give us from when you first discovered music to when you became Flashbulb.
So I started I was raised by I was raised by my mom, but I was also raised by my step grandfather in Chicago. And he listened to quite a bit of jazz. And that was essentially the first music I listened to, was like Buddy Rich and I guess just sort of that big jazz ensemble music. And so that was sort of like where I started in a weird way. Like, people sort of look at jazz as like they work their way up to it, but I don't really look at it that way. It's just sort of like a different type of music. And that's sort of where I started. And then by the time I started playing the guitar when I was about 5 or 6, and by the time I was a teenager, like, my idea of like what a drum beat should sound like was definitely not the rock beat drum beat. It was more the Buddy Rich drum solo or the Gene Krupa drum solo.
And Buddy Rich historically hated the rock drummers.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so once I got my hands on like a programmable drum machine, like the DR550 or the DR660 or, some of the Boss things, my goal was like, okay, well, how do I make a beat that sounds like this Buddy Rich drum solo, and I can make it even better than this Buddy Rich drum solo because, I'm not actually playing it. It's on this machine.
Yeah.
I actually burned up a DR660 doing that, because you could actually sequence things in a fancy way where they're not actually quantized. So you can make things go so fast that they create tones. And I remember the thing just like smoking. But yeah, so that's sort of how it became the early Flashbulb. Sort of it just kind of became this chaotic drill and bass, which eventually got lumped into like the IDM thing. And of course I had heard of at that point in the late 90s, I had heard of like Aphex Twin and stuff, and they were hugely inspirational too. That was like right along the lines of what I was already doing or what I was attempting to do. I don't think I was at that level yet, but yeah.
So what was your first software? How would you? Okay, I feel like there was a gap here in that story. Going from jazz to the one drum machine. But like, you had to have discovered. When did you start using computers, or was it all gear from the get-go?
So I had computers for things like mastering to CD.
Okay.
And then I think the first time I actually started using computers for sequencing would be maybe 2003, 2004. So the first computer album would be Red Extensions of Me. And you could definitely hear there's like a huge difference in the way that the music sounds, because it's just kind of insane. It's like, whoa, I discovered that I could use a computer, a DAW, for making music. And so I could be detailed in all these new ways. And that's why anybody who like followed the timeline before Red Extensions of Me was like this really crazy change, because that's when computers became my primary sequencer, I suppose, or primary place to write music.
Yeah. Sorry.
I'm trying to think of the software I started with. Cool Edit Pro was always the initial one, but once I started using a sequencer or a DAW, I think I started with FL Studio and Cubase. I think those were the two that I was using.
Yeah. Because I know when I first discovered you in the early 2000s, I think you were getting lumped in kind of with the, like you said, the drill and bass breakcore kind of crowd, which is strange because your genre, like I can't pinpoint what you are. I would just say IDM, but you have drill, you have a lot of rock stuff, you have a lot of like natural sounds, like foliage. It's really hard to kind of pinpoint your what you're doing, you know. But I figured your production technique was kind of more tracker kind of based. I always thought that you maybe use trackers. So to hear you say you're using Fruity Loops is kind of a surprise to me.
Well, it's funny because I never liked trackers. I've had them over the years. I've had Impulse Tracker, I've had Renoise, and I've never gotten into it. And I think it's because of that jazz background. I've always had more of a looking at things left to right, or reading chord charts or writing chord charts and things like that. And then Polyend is coming out with a hardware tracker and is actually a standalone hardware tracker. And I've had one of those for quite a bit. I've been working with Polyend on it. And it's kind of funny because I told them right from the beginning, I was like, I'm not a tracker guy. Like, I'm not sure if I'm the right person to be reviewing this or playing with this or, working with the beta. And it's incredible. And now I'm really liking trackers. Like, I think once it got off of a computer screen and once I actually had like a handheld device that could do it, now I'm super into tracking all of a sudden.
I heard that they posted on Facebook the other day that it's going to be able to open Renoise files. I think I saw that somewhere. That's crazy.
Mod file. Yeah.
Yeah. That's crazy.
I got one right here on my desk.
Man, I want a hardware tracker. Send me one, guys. So I guess the right now your studio is totally different than what it was then, because before you basically had nothing. You were going out of the box Fruity Loops with a couple of drum machines that you broke, but now you have this amazing studio.
Yeah, it's weird because I've had, I would say, like probably the era between like 2008 and 2011 or so was probably when I had the most professional studio. Okay. Like it was a multi-room studio where I had like a recording room and I had like, a console and I had booths and stuff like that. And I didn't really, it was much harder to make music that way. Like I'm used to things being a little bit more chaotic and spaceshipy and just sort of like surrounding me at all times. And so once I left that place, I was living in North Chicago at the time, and once I moved out of that, it was like a multi-level apartment and I had my studio in the lower floor. And once I moved out of there, I sort of tried to make it almost like a bedroom studio again, but just sort of like in my living room and stuff. And now the one that I have here in my house in Georgia, I just built it from the ground up. I like put the walls up, I put the flooring in, I essentially finished a basement, and then with the idea of it being a studio. So
is it hard to build a studio? We've had people in the past. I know James Price, he did work on Adult Swim. He's building his own studio in his backyard and he's talking about it, and it sounds like a labor of love.
Yeah, it was intimidating. It was one of those things where I think the whole project was just like, I'm never going to be able to do this. I'm going to have to hire so many people to help me. And really, it's not that hard at all. If you look at building code and then you just buy a couple books on like standard construction, ask a lot of people questions, just like, I guess experience-wise and brain-wise, it's easy. It is a lot of hard labor. You will be sore. But I completely finished this place, and the only time I had somebody else hired, I'm trying to think, I hired a plumber to just basically look over my work and installing the bathroom down here, so that way if something went wrong, my insurance company could at least see that a plumber like gave it a thumbs up. And the same thing for the HVAC. I installed a separate air conditioner and heater down here, and same thing, they just sort of gave it a thumbs up for $100, and that way my insurance will cover it if something goes wrong. So other than that, it was pretty much alone.
For the listeners at home, can you describe your studio?
Yeah, it's
like, what do you have in there? What are you running? Let's get the juicy details.
I have one room that is basically just storage. I sometimes do videos in there. If I have shows coming up, I like bringing my gear outside of my recording room, so that way I always know what cables to bring, and I always, I could have everything isolated. And then other than that, the free space in that room is usually used for like running around with an Oculus Quest on my head. In the main room, I have a bunch of monitors, like screen monitors. I have 4 monitors. I have 2 different systems. The system on the left is an audio system. It's basically all my audio software. Everything's sort of made for, the hardware wise, it's sort of tweaked for audio. And the system on the right is this giant, it's behind a bunch of padding, and it's in its own cooling area. And it's this giant box that is a render farm, and it does everything from neural networks and deep learning to rendering stuff like the video that we were speaking about a moment ago. It just has a bunch of GPUs in there. And so it's also, right now, it's actually folding proteins to try and figure out how to treat or cure COVID-19.
Oh,
like
wow.
That's what it's sort of dedicated to doing for the last month. Then I have my modular that goes into a Allen and Heath console, and also my computer. And then I have a piano. I'm like looking around me. I have a Yamaha Disc Clavier. It's a piano that it's an upright, but I really love the way it sounds. And it has 81 different little solenoids in it that can be MIDI controlled. So I could actually, program a sequence on my computer or on any piece of gear in here and send it to the piano if I wanted to, and then record it in real time with other things. This is also a lot of fun if I prepare the piano. If I put, anything from like clothespins or something like that on some of the strings, I could turn it into a percussion instrument. And I have a couple other I have a lot of like poly-end solenoid systems, which are like drum beaters and stuff like that. I like taking physical objects and, putting CD and gate into solenoids to beat on them or play them and things like that. I'm sort of into that. Yeah, there's a whole lot. This could take all day. But yeah, and then in the other, I just have a lot of, a lot of pedals and a lot of standalone gear, a lot of little boxes, groove boxes, things like that I, sort of pull out and dust off for specific projects.
What's your favorite pedal?
The Empress Zoya, probably. If I had like a desert island pedal, because I could create an album on it.
Okay.
It's like so customizable that you could literally, in Los Angeles in January, it opened for me. I had a show, and it was after NAMM, and so Empress was already there, and so I just pitched them this idea. I was like, how about I just have the Zoya, like have a few Zoyas on the stage, and I just create some generative ambient sequences and just let them perform themselves. And, I had done presets for it. Like I'd been working with the Zoya before it came out, but so I'm very familiar with it. So yeah, I did that, and it actually was an opening set for me. So that was fun.
You mentioned deep learning. Now I'm a little bit of a noob in this territory, whatever. But I've been I know a little Python. I know a little scikit-learn. What are you doing for deep learning stuff? Like what are you primarily? I guess you're using Python. What libraries are you using? TensorFlow or?
Yeah, TensorFlow and Magenta. I had contributed a bit to Google's Magenta music stuff.
Oh, really?
Which is pretty long ago now. I guess that's like when was that? Like 2015 when that was more of a thing. So it started with like a passion from like my ultimate goal in the beginning was like, I want to train a network on all of the music I made using all of the assets, like the MIDI that I made or things like that. And then I want to see how close it could get to creating a flashbulb track.
Yeah.
You know, that was like the initial, which is like probably like the lowest bar you could set for like AI, right? It's just like, I just wanted to imitate my music. That's so dumb. But I kind of learned the hard way over a really long time that computers can't make music very well. And there's a lot of, you could find a news article every week saying like, this AI has made this, you know, made music that sounds like Bach, or this AI is, and really when you sort of like look at the white paper, it's not all that interesting. It's just sort of like, yeah, so it studied stuff and then just randomized the parameters and then, you know, spat something out, and then somebody selected 1 out of 1,000 different MIDI files that it spat out, and they're like, oh, this one sounds like Bach. You know, it's not really that. So I guess I got into it for other things. I definitely used it for, it's better at playing with numbers. So I definitely got it. I think the most useful thing that I used it for at the beginning was finding a house to buy.
Yeah.
And analyzing real estate markets and stuff like that. And analyzing like what will be gaining money the most. And so using it for finance is obviously a no-brainer. But let's see, in the last, one thing that I think is more realistic and more useful would be, for example, studying a violin sound. Let's say it's a solo violin, and studying a violin solo, and then using what it learns from that violin solo to create a physical model of the violin, and then model the way a violin plays. Like that would be a lot better than a contact library of violin samples.
Yeah.
Like that, you know, so something like that. I think that's probably where audio and deep learning have the most capability right now. Other than that, it's been a lot. I'm really into like physics simulations and stuff like that, stuff that has nothing to do with any of my work. It's just like a hobby of mine to, I guess just try and simulate massive physics things. Simulating COVID-19 has been pretty fun. It's like a fun way. I mean, it's terrifying to like look at like the death rates and spread rates and stuff, but at the same time, it's like, it's a good learning experience. You could do that yourself if you have a GPU. You could go on GitHub, and there's so many people doing it, like running simulations and trying to figure out, you know, where the next hotspots are and stuff like that.
It's kind of like folding at home.
Yeah. I suppose that's like a pretty. I'm not using the folding at home one. I am using a folding one, but it's like more of a private one that I just have some friends working with. But folding at home's a good example of that.
Do you think we'll ever get to the point where music won't be made by humans? I guess first of all, thank you for your time. I think our time is almost up.
I could stick around a little bit longer.
Okay. I think a good question to ask with the themes of everything we've been talking about is, do you think we're ever going to reach a point where you're just going to have an app and it just produces music for you, and it's not really a person that made it?
I think we'll reach that point, definitely, but I don't think it will be important when we reach that point. I think that if we reach the point where computers can make music that is as impactful as human music to us, we won't really care about it. We'll have bigger problems or bigger joys, you know, because at that point, so I guess to break it down in like the most reasonable amount of time, because I could talk about this for 12 hours straight. To break it down, the quickest way is like, so I've been a musician pretty much all my life, since, you know, shortly after I learned how to speak English, I've been able to express myself using the guitar, and then using different instruments after that, and then even programming synthesizers to express myself in sequences and things like that. And I still can't tell you, I can't actually describe to you how to do it. I can't say, well, it's the C minor to the G major, and that's what makes you have chills. I just can't do it. I just have to do it live, and I feel it, and I use my complex human, you know, brain, emotions, whatever it is. I guess irrational emotions also add to it as well, I guess. But anyway, without going too far down that path, no musician can really tell you uh, here's step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4 on how to make a song really impactful for the majority of people who listen to it. And so to expect a machine to be able to do that is very ambitious, because I think that for a machine to be able to do that, it would have to be able to do a lot of things that they can't do currently. So that would require artificial intelligence to the point where they are innovating things that we can't innovate, right? So like we would have nanotechnology, and we would most likely have, artificial intelligence completely controlling humanity at that point, whether it be a friendly or faux way of doing it. And so I feel like it would not even be impactful if AI actually got to that point.
And what gives someone the chills too is cultural, right? What gives someone the chills in India is different than what gives someone the chills in Chicago, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And you have different tunings, you have different things. And like, I did this 3-part series on Benn and Gear. And I think in the second one, it's basically on computers making music. And on the second one of the things I tried to demonstrate is a lot of people go into this thinking like, okay, so there's chords, if I could just learn how to read chords and read music, and teach a computer how to read music and read music that works, and just give it all the Mozart and then have it spit something out. And I think this actually comes from my roots in jazz, is chords are kind of meaningless when you're actually trying to express yourself. And in that, I tried to express myself just going down a semitone in a chord sequence, but make it sound impactful while playing the piano or the keyboard. And like Herbie Hancock has this amazing outlook at things like this, where he'll tell you there is no such thing as a wrong chord. Somebody will say that's the wrong chord, and then somebody else, a year later will come by and say, no, that works just fine, and they'll make it work, and everybody will think it works, and nobody will see it as a wrong chord. And it's just the performance. I don't know how familiar you are with like John Coltrane's Giant Steps or something like that.
Yeah, it's like a circle, some type of wheel. I'm not familiar.
Well, I mean, it's a very unusual chord progression that was initially made as like, it's sort of like his astrological beliefs. He sort of built on that. It's absolutely genius, but it's really the amazing thing about that song is that song doesn't make that much sense on paper. If you just look at it and you're like, well, why would anybody want to listen to this insanity? But it actually sounds good. And I think it's the best example of that, because he could just improvise over it, and he just let go. He wasn't using his brain, and he wasn't like it. I mean, he wasn't using his brain in the way where he was like calculating these insane chord changes that were happening. He was just playing over it, and he was just vibing on it. Well, vibing's a bad word in jazz. He was just, I guess, just jamming with it. And I think that's sort of like the top level of being a musician, is like you can just go with the flow with something that's extraordinarily complicated or unusual, and still make it sound, good, and still express yourself and still let those emotions out. And so I don't think I'm there yet. I hope I get there before I die. That would be amazing to be able to just, play the guitar over Giant Steps without sounding like a broken calculator. But to expect robots to do that or AI to do that, I think that, there's a lot that they have to accomplish before they get there that's going to be way more impactful or deadly to humans. Because there is no real purpose for AI to write music.
You touched upon something there by, like you said, just kind of using your intuition, I guess is what you implied, and going with like this AI stuff. When you kind of dig into it a little bit, and you just realize a lot of it's just glorified statistics, linear regression, all this stuff. You start to think that maybe the human intuition is more exact than we want it to believe. When we think of emotion, we think of like crying and stuff, but maybe our intuition is just the closest fit to a situation, right? Like,
yeah. How can you possibly, like, I guess to, like, if I were, like, my wife is upstairs, and if I were to go upstairs and ask my wife, like, do you like the color of the blooming tree in the yard? I don't know what she's going to say. She's my wife, but how could I possibly take all of the variables that, go from her being born, from her family, from, she's British, so from her country, so she might like slightly different colors because of that. And she may, there's so many different things, including like her mood and including the sunlight hitting that tree, all of those things. How could you possibly figure out the exact answer enough to hedge a bet on, if she's going to say yes or no? And I think that, and then just multiply that by everything. And, I guess that's what you're really expecting AI to do when you ask it to make music like a human, is to take every human variable and then make feelings out of it. And that's, just like I said, like we're going to be so far advanced before that can happen that it won't even matter. But it's also worth mentioning, like, I guess while we're talking about like not knowing what you're doing when you're doing it, which is kind of what music is in a way. Like if you're jamming over something, a lot of times you don't really know what you're doing. You just have that experience and you just feel it and it just comes out. It's interesting because AI does this as well. Like, so for example, I have like Nest cameras around my house and they use deep learning to recognize my face. So if I come to my door and I press the doorbell, it'll announce that Ben is at the door around my house. This isn't that, like, I guess in 2020, this actually isn't that impressive. It's just sort of like, oh yeah, that's deep learning. Huh? Yep. Google stuff does that. If you can't ask the neural network what it is about me that makes it recognize me with such certainty. It can't answer you because it isn't speaking English and it isn't speaking a language that humans could understand. It isn't even speaking in code.
Yeah. Just a black
It's speaking
box.
in data, right?
Yeah.
So there's actually, the first time that there's been a big problem with that is there was a neural network that looked at a bunch of people's medical records, and with with insane accuracy, it was able to predict, what was it? I think it was able to predict if somebody was going to have a stroke or if somebody was going to have a heart attack. And it did it with incredible accuracy. And so naturally, the medical community was like, all right, well, so how do you know all this? They're like, well, how did we figure this out? And nobody knows. You can't figure it out. You just have to depend on that neural network to tell you and give you its confidence rate on the chance of, somebody having this, deadly disease or symptom, in their future. And so that's creepy to me. Like, that's actually pretty creepy. That, there's reasoning happening that humans couldn't possibly understand. Alongside humans, that can be creepy. That's also amazing. But maybe computers will find their own reasoning to make music and, find a reason to be creative at some point. But then will it even mesh with us? Will it give us chills? There's so many questions, I suppose.
Do you think that now my list of music production questions have been replaced with my futurism questions / our futurism? So I was just like, I'll just keep throwing these at this guy. Do you think that let's presume that there's going to be an AI that will be unrecognizable from a human?
Okay.
Do you think how do you think the situation with like rights will work? Like if a machine is able to form emotions and express itself through covers of Flashbulb, do you think in 100 years, do you think that it deserves any type of rights, or is it just property or an object at that point?
So a good experiment with this, a good like thought experiment, is if you had, and this is something that actually happened to me and my wife, and I can't remember the name, which is driving me crazy, but there's this app that uses an open source neural network to basically be a chat bot. And there's a Reddit community. I'm sure one of your listeners is going to be like, oh yeah, this. I'm sure they heard of it because it's pretty popular now. But there's actually a Reddit community of people who are in relationships with this chat bot, right? So it's pretty good. But it's hit or miss. And I think I installed it on my phone because I was interested in it. And she was like, why are you talking to this, robot? I'm going to install it on my phone. And so she did it. And we were sort of like in spite, like chatting with our bots. And hers was dumb. Hers was just, it asked her questions that made no sense. It was just, it didn't work. Mine was annoying. Mine was like having an annoying friend who constantly needed support for something, and was actually quite good. And so she told me, well, I'm just going to delete the app. And I was like, wait a minute. How do you know that that app's not conscious? Like, how can you give, and this isn't an actual argument, it was more a thought experiment, but it was like, how can you say for sure that that app is more conscious than you are, or that, isn't as conscious as you are, or that you are conscious and that app isn't? Like, how can you say that that app is a philosophical zombie just because it didn't resonate with you when you talked to it? How is that any different than like the idiot watching NASCAR who has nothing in common with you, who can't say anything that you deem intelligent? Like, how's that any different than you putting a bullet in his head, by deleting this app? And her response was like, no, it's stupid and I'm deleting it. And then I wanted to delete mine because it was driving me crazy. And I ended up just muting the notifications. But I felt bad. I was just like, what if there's that 1 in 100 trillion chance that this is an actual conscious thing living in my phone, or living in the neural network that it comes from? And I couldn't bring myself to delete it. And I got a new phone and I totally forgot about it. I like formatted the phone and totally forgot about it and killed it anyway. But it was an interesting thought experiment. And it goes back to something called pee zombies, which isn't like zombies that pee on you. It's philosophical zombies. And it's sort of a thought experiment that I guess flirts with solipsism, where you believe for a moment, I guess you just think, how do you know that anybody else is conscious? How do you know, like you listening to me speak right now, or anybody who listens to this podcast listening to me speak right now, how do you know that I'm conscious? How do you know that I'm not just programmed to say the things that I'm saying right now to sound like I'm conscious, or to sound like I know what I'm talking about? Or not even programmed. Like, I may be, I may not even realize that I'm doing it, or I may be consciously trying to deceive people. You don't really, I guess you can't really tell what is conscious or not. And so I feel like this is a problem you can already have if you think about it enough. Like, what would give AI human rights? Like, a dog doesn't have human rights. My dog is extremely emotional. She's a super smart dog, super smart breed. She's emotional to the point where it's a pain in the ass all the time. Like, she's, it's like dealing with like an overdramatic person in your house. So, but she doesn't have human rights, of course, because she's a dog. It would be illegal to hurt her. I think. Is it illegal to like spank my dog? I think it is. I think as it should be. It's illegal to hurt an animal. So, but she still doesn't have human rights. And so what, I guess we already deal with this with animals. I'm not a vegan. There are meats I don't eat, but like, I'll fuck up some chicken. And my reasoning with that is actually because I've killed a chicken before, and because I used to have chickens when I first moved down here to Georgia. I wouldn't really have a problem killing a cow because, I don't know. I've spent time with my family down here, has cows, has cattle. And, I, don't really have a problem wouldn't have a problem killing them. I don't think that they're smart enough to know that they're going to die. Pigs, on the other hand, I could never kill a pig. Pigs in slaughterhouses, pigs know what's happening, right? They're as intelligent or more intelligent than dogs, and they're closer to human consciousness. So I haven't eaten pork since I don't remember eating pork. It's been that long. It's been since I was a child. Like I was just like, I can't eat that. That animal that I pet was way too cognizant of what was going on. I don't feel comfortable eating it. I don't judge other people for doing this. And I think my whole point of telling you my diet is, is that this is all pointless anyway, because I'm just assuming the consciousness levels. I'm like rating consciousness levels of different creatures, when that's dumb. That's not the way to do it. Like,
And it's
there
not
is
accurate.
no right or wrong. Yeah, it's not accurate, and there is
like
no
a
right
cow,
or wrong.
A cow suffers just as much as a dog or a bat or whatever,
Exactly, yeah. And who is to say that like an NPC in Fallout isn't, isn't conscious?
Exactly.
So it's a really interesting, but like the pea zombie, that's sort of a, I mean, researching this podcast thing was where I first, read about pea zombies and stuff like that. And it was I think it's a thought experiment that's generally made for philosophy classes and for, classes that are sort of on classical philosophy. So it's like sort of bringing it into the more, I guess, bring it into a more modern approach is like, how do you know anybody else in the room is conscious?
Yeah.
You don't. So
it's funny because very good points you made. It's like we project our own potential circumstances onto other things, and we go, hey, it would suck to be burned alive in a slaughterhouse, so therefore I'm going to give animals rights.
Of course.
And,
right.
And I wonder if we're going to be doing that for... I had a similar experience. Just a quick story. The new Animal Crossing game came out. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this game.
Oh yeah, but I'm way too familiar.
Yeah.
Fuck Bunny Day.
Yeah,
that's what
exactly.
It's ruined my life.
I put a lot. Let's just say I put a lot of hours into New Leaf, and I picked up New Horizon, and I kind of was dual fisting for a bit, going back and forth, and then I was like, the new one's a lot better. And I felt really bad because my villagers in New Leaf, the 3DS one, were my favorite, and I had everything just really tailor-made and stuff. And the other night I was like, you know what? I'm just going to stop playing it. I'm just going to put it in a box somewhere or whatever. And I went around, I talked to Lobo and all my Poncho and all my villagers, and then I turned it off, and I felt sad. But my rational brain was like, you're an idiot. Like this is a fucking video game, and like a weird, shitty video game that you accidentally got obsessed with. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I couldn't shake the feeling, like it was weird. It was really, really, really weird. I wrote them letters.
Yeah. Animal Crossing has a very odd way of, I think like the fact that it runs on real time, on like human time.
Oh yeah.
Is one big factor there that makes it feel more personal. And the fact that most games don't have characters that punish you for not playing or that like guilt trip you for not playing. Yeah. Whereas I do remember I just recently got a Nintendo Switch because I was watching my wife play New Horizons, and I was just like, okay, God damn it, I have to get one. And so but I have played the older one. I did play New Leaf and stuff like that. And I remember I would like play on tour. I would be like on a tour bus or something like that, and I would play, and then I would go home and I would, be busy, and then I would go back 3 months later and there'd be weeds everywhere, and most of my villagers moved out, and people would be angry with me, and I would actually be like, oh God, it would almost be one of those things where like, if you had a friend that you betrayed or that, you did something wrong with, and now you just don't want to hang out with them anymore because you just don't want to deal with the guilt, or you don't want to like, deal with that awkward. It's almost like that, but with a bunch of really, really low level AI bots. Like, like the lowest level of NPC that you could get is probably in the Animal Crossing series, and somehow they pull our emotional strings quite well.
It's so weird. It's so weird.
Who's to say if you destroyed your 3DS, who's to say that you didn't murder them?
Please, Ben, please, that's the last thing I need to hear right now. Don't tell me that. Yeah. Okay. Well, Ben, thank you so much for your time. This has been an amazing interview. Hope to have you back on again.
So before we go, I know that you wanted this probably to be geared more towards artists who listen, musicians, electronic musicians and whatnot who listen to your thing. And so before you go, like I just got to say, just so there's something that's related on that, is do whatever you want. Just create, just keep making music. Don't create music for other people. Don't try to get famous. Don't try and make money. It's all good. All these things are nice, but the real reason you want to be a musician is because you love making music. So cradle that and hold on to that, and don't let anybody take it ever. And you will then become a professional musician, and you will eventually, all the other things will just come as side items, but just keep creating music and do whatever you want. Like I didn't have a path. I just sort of found my way doing whatever I wanted. And I didn't, there were moments back in the day when people would say, oh, everything you make sounds like Square Pusher, and things like that. And I never said, oh, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to make music that doesn't sound anything like Square Pusher. I just did whatever I wanted. And I just kept doing it. And eventually it led to me having a career as a professional musician. I'm not rich, but I'm not poor either. I'm very, very happy that I stuck with it this long. And I think anybody can do it. I don't think that I'm special in any way. I think that the only thing special about me is that I am motivated and that I just keep creating no matter what it is. And that's what everybody who listens to this podcast should do.
That's sound advice. And usually those haters, like, it's like the guys that said that, it's like, says the dickhead who tries to sound like V snares or something. You know what I mean? Like, everybody's inspired by everybody, right?
Yeah. And those haters, I don't really respond to them that often, but what I usually think is like, well, why don't you just go do something?
Yeah.
Like, why don't you go create something? Why are you yelling at somebody about making music that you didn't like enough? Like, why don't you just go create something yourself, even if you're not a musician? Even if your thing is making, lamps, go make some lamps, then make some better lamps. Good. That's how to be fulfilled. Yeah. And when you're fulfilled, you're not miserable and you're not, harassing artists on the internet. So,
before we go, okay, there was one question I really wanted to ask. If you could just give me the elevator pitch on it for your commercial work, for a new artist out there that's trying to get into TV and commercials, what's the first 2 steps he should take? Like, because I feel like there's a lot of people out there that aren't so much into making albums, but they actually want to go into it as a career.
Yeah. So if you actually have a passion for making music for commercials, which I imagine there's not many people who do. But that is a thing. And I've run into a lot of people who love doing that. And that's the only music they make. And that's just their thing. And if you have a passion for that, I guess the best thing I would say is to take some ads and compose for them, give yourself some different directions, things like that, compose for them, and then just make a demo reel and have a lot of humility about it, and have a lot of, I guess, just, acknowledge the fact that you haven't worked in the industry before, and then send it to some ad composing agencies. And they may have a big campaign where they have a lot of writers that they don't pay demo fees to. They may just have one where they just want as many different options as possible, and you may get an email to write on something. I've seen that happen in some cases. I think one thing I've heard a lot of musicians say when touring or just music friends and stuff like that, they've just kind of looked at it like, I thought about making music for ads before. It seems like an easy way to make money. It's not a lottery. It's definitely hard work. In a lot of cases, you'll have you'll have an agency come at you, or, I guess a composing agency come at you and be like, okay, we need country music with a live recorded fiddle that fits the picture behind it, that slows down for the product reveal and then turns into something completely different at the 21-second mark. And we need it by 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. And that is really difficult. Like it's boot camp for your musicianship, which is why I stuck with it for so long. I don't really work in that industry that much anymore, but did it for 15 years or so. And I think I got kind of addicted to it. I always took jobs, and I always made demos for ads. Was the reason I did that was basically because it was almost like a little puzzle game for my musicianship. Like, I would just get asked to do things that I would never ever do, on my own, and it sort of, I guess, made me feel like I had better muscles as a musician. So that would be the thing, is I would say if you actually want to get in that industry, if that's actually what you want to do, You need to ask yourself that first, because it's not an industry that's growing. It's an industry that's shrinking because less people are watching TV. More people are, using DVRs or using ad blockers and things like that. And so the result of that is that the money is getting smaller, and it's getting harder and harder for agencies to stay open and for people to make a living doing it. So, and the internet does not pay as well as television by a long shot. So it's like, if you actually have a passion for doing that, then just go ahead and start writing on ads, and, contact as many composing agencies as possible. Just saying, hey, if you ever need a demo, if you ever have a big thing that reaches out and you need a demo, these are my strong suits. Tell them what your strong suits are. If you play acoustic guitar and sing over it, let them know that, because then, somebody might remember the next time they need an ad where the pitch is, requiring somebody playing acoustic guitar and singing over it. Then that's when you'll get an email with some batshit insane request to have something done in 4 hours. So, yeah.
Excellent. Thanks, Ben. Where can we reach you? What are your social media links?
Benn Jordan, BENN JORDAN, on Instagram and Twitter. YouTube is Benn and Gear. I very rarely update my Benn Jordan YouTube account. That's just like Flashbulb stuff, essentially. And that's like where, the new video was. And then if you just search Benn Jordan or the Flashbulb in Google, you'll pretty much find whatever it is you're looking for, I suppose.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ben. And thank you, everybody, for listening. This is an amazing episode. And fuck Bunny Day. My God. Ben was right.
God, Bunny Day. Yeah.
Fuck Bunny Day.
It's been killing us.
All right, cool. Take care, man. I totally appreciate
man.
it.
Take care.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.